Hello and welcome. I'm Sima Katauka and you're watching the World Report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at the top headlines of this hour. President Arshande Touadera is seeking a third term as general election began today. After a 2023 constitutional change scrapped term limits, however, Touadera is still favored to win over opposition figures Anicet Georges Duluguele and Henry Maria Dondra, with provisional results due on January 5th next year. Britain and Germany have signed a $70 million joint procurement deal to acquire the RCH-155 mobile artillery system. As the UK Defence Ministry said, the system can fire 8 rounds per minute, with units to be tested by both the British and German armies. Fresh clashes have been reported in Eastern Democratic Republic of the Congo in Uvira, where M23 rebels seized the strategic town earlier this month, despite a US-brokered peace deal reaffirmed by Kinshasa and Kigali. Congo's army reportedly struck M23 positions with drones at Kalundu port on Lake Tanganyika. South Korea's President Lee Jae-myung has appointed conservative politician and former United Future Party lawmaker Lee Hae-hyun as the budget minister, signaling a cross-party move as Lee Hae-hyun said she supports the president's goals of economic growth and expanded social welfare. Kosovo is headed to the polls today in its second election of this year, with nationalist Prime Minister Albin Kurti and his Vetëvendosje party seeking a majority to end the year-long political deadlock that has paralyzed the parliament. Failure to form a government risks derailing the ratification of $1.2 billion in EU and World Bank loans. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is set to meet with US President Donald Trump in Florida's Mar-a-Lago. Key topic for the discussion will be Zelenskyy's 20-point proposal for peace between Russia and Ukraine. Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov has said that European Union troops in Ukraine would be legitimate targets for Russia. Lavrov, without providing evidence, has also accused European politicians of being driven by ambitions in their relations with Kyiv. The United Nations has renewed its call for an immediate ceasefire in Sudan. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has highlighted the humanitarian crisis, with nearly 12 million displaced since the war began. Now for this hour, we start with Ukraine. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is set to meet with US President Donald Trump to discuss a new 20-point peace proposal aimed at ending the nearly 4-year conflict with Russia. The proposal, which emerged from intense negotiations, lacks Moscow's approval and comes after a large-scale Russian missile and drone assault on Kyiv. The meeting at Trump's Mar-a-Lago residence will be the first face-to-face encounter since October. Zelensky hopes the talks will be constructive, especially after Russia's latest attack on Kyiv, which he sees as evidence that President Vladimir Putin is not interested in peace. Zelensky has also held a conference call with European leaders who pledged continued support for Ukraine's peace efforts, while Russia made territorial gains in eastern Ukraine, including capturing Mirnograd and Guliai Pole. Putin has dismissed peace talks, stating that if Kyiv does not seek peace, Russia will resolve the conflict by military means. Now for this discussion, we welcome Dr. Gilbert Doctorow. Thank you very much, and Dr. Doctorow, for joining us again. Good to see you. Now, looking at this, what can we expect from the upcoming talks, and what do you think were discussed among your European allies and Zelensky in Canada through video conference?
We are witnessing political theater. Almost all of the actors on the stage have their own interests and their own objectives, none of them as completely aligned objectives with the others. And what this means is that where the war is headed is not being described in the daily news. Where the war is headed, I personally had thought, was headed to a negotiated settlement on the basis of Ukrainian capitulation. Now I revise that estimate and believe that the war will continue and will end in a frozen conflict after Russia has virtually destroyed the Ukraine and taken all the properties away from Ukraine that it thinks are necessary to ensure that Ukraine can never present a security risk. By that I mean the Russians will take Odessa, the Russians will take Kharkiv, the Russians will take all the territory east of the Dnieper River, and whatever is left, which will be a rump Ukraine, which has no access to the sea, will be an impoverished nation for the next 50 years, and for that reason is unlikely to be admitted to the EU. That's how this war will end.
Right, and Dr. Now, so we hear reports from Russia, of course, that they are advancing in front lines. Although we don't have any journalists or foreign journalists over there, including our channels, reporters from there, but what are we to make of the not exaggerated, but the excess information that has been coming recently, that Russia is advancing in these front lines?
Well, the Russians are intentionally keeping their plans very close to the chest. Less than a week ago, President Putin had his direct line annual Q&A with the nation. And in the first 5-10 minutes of that, he discussed the state of the Russian economy and the state of Russia at war. What I can tell you is that he intentionally said nothing to the Russian public about where the war is headed. All that he was described how this town is being taken, how that little hamlet is being taken. In other words, the commander-in-chief of the Russian armed forces said no more to his own nation than they would receive every night watching the daily news and learning about this little hamlet or that little hamlet falling or being taken when they have no idea where these are or what the strategic objectives are. So the Russians are not giving anyone information about their strategic plans. I'm not criticizing them, I'm simply making a statement of fact.
Thank you for highlighting that. And now looking back at the upcoming talks, once again, how aligned do you think US and Ukraine are before heading to these fresh talks?
I don't think they're at all aligned. Mr. Trump in the last day made it clear that it's more than just small details that have to be ironed out. Zelensky is coming and stated publicly that his intention is to secure American security guarantees for his country when they conclude a ceasefire peace with Russia. Well, he's not going to get that guarantee. Mr. Trump very quietly will tell him that this is utter nonsense until and unless there is an agreement on the sides, which means a permanent peace and not a temporary ceasefire. The United States is not going to commit itself to Ukraine's protection.
So lastly, Mr. Doctor, how frustrated do you think President Trump is? As you know, he has been eyeing this peace deal from even before he comes back to White House.
I think his position on this has changed over time. It's been clear for the last 2 to 3 weeks that after the Trump administration published its new national security strategy paper, there is enormous opposition to Trump's overall foreign policy vision, which absolutely upturns the whole of the American foreign policy since 1949. Under these circumstances, in the present talks over Ukraine, I think Mr. Trump is quite happy to just let it roll on without any necessity for him to make commitments this way or that way, favoring the Ukrainians or favoring the Russians, and by doing that, raising enormous political conflict for himself on Capitol Hill. So as I said, all of the parties to this political theater have their own reasons for its failure.
Thank you very much. With that, I would like to thank Dr. Gilbert Doctorow for joining us as a Russian affairs expert from Brussels. Now we move on to Middle East. Alawites in Syria took to the streets in Latakia today to protest a mosque bombing in Homs that has killed 8 people. The attack targeted an Alawite area and is the latest in a series of violence against the minority since the fall of Bashar al-Assad in December last year. Security forces were deployed to break up clashes between demonstrators and counter-protesters. Protesters called for political federalism and regional autonomy, demanding an end to bloodshed and the release of detained community members. Although authorities have released some detainees and promised protection for all communities, Alawites remain concerned about their future under the new Islamist leadership. Now for this discussion, we welcome Ambassador Suresh Goyal. He's a former Indian diplomat, joins us live from New Delhi. Thank you very much, Ambassador Goyal, for joining us again. Good to see you.
Good afternoon. Good evening.
Good evening, yes.
Yes.
Now looking at this, can you tell us who are these Alawites, even though I've mentioned that they are part of Islam?
Well, it's difficult to say that they trace their entire history in a short time, but Alawites are a stream of the Muslims owing allegiance to the descendants of Muhammad, and they are not often accepted by the Sunni Islamic, which is the earliest form of Islam, as a true Muslims, and therefore conflicts between Sunnis or the Wahhabis, which is the most fundamentalist form of Islam, and Alawites are common in many of the countries, particularly in the Middle East, like in Syria, which has a very substantial Shia population and a substantial Alawite population owing allegiance to the descendants of Muhammad. Now, Bashar Assad, as the president of Syria, did manage to keep these kind of dissidents under control and make sure that this intra-factional or intra-religious rivalry between those who are more fundamentalist and more the Wahhabi style of Muslim and the further slightly removed streams, that the clashes or the differences between them do not turn into actual clashes on the street. Shara, the current Syrian president, obviously has not been able to do that. Please also remember that Shara, by terms of ideology, he actually belonged to ISIS, which has most of the members in ISIS are really the most fundamental of the Islamic ideologies. And therefore, it was to be expected that unless particular care is taken, conflict would arise between them and the other streams of Islam. Therefore, while we do not know the source of attack on the mosque of the Alawites, Alawites do feel threatened by these kind of activities because they could perhaps suspect that these attacks are being undertaken with encouragement, if not support, encouragement of the state police or the state armed police, and therefore they feel threatened. That is what I can say for the time being.
Thank you for sharing that. And Ambassador Goyal, now you know Syria is of course a newly built country now that the leader has changed after the Bashar al-Assad's fall. How are they managing minority representation in their government?
I don't know. Frankly speaking, there is very little news coming out from Syria on the relationship with the minorities. One can only speculate that if the present government does indeed belong to the ISIS ideology, then the relationship with the minorities would not be very comfortable or would be actually fraught with all kinds of differences. But that is purely a speculation because I do not have any hard evidence to support what I'm saying.
Thank you for sharing that regardless. And you know, Now, just moving the focus to a more broad spectrum here, Ambassador, do you think these freshly built countries or government, what challenges do they face in making sure the political elites or the minorities are included when making a new country?
Aruma, that's a very, very broad question. But immediately, what I can say is that whenever there is a new state like Syria is not a new state, but Syria has been affected by the strife for so long that both economic and the political systems are in doldrums, and therefore the immediate requirement for the government would be, number one, to bring in some kind of political and social stability in the country, which again is very hard work given the credentials of the government. And number two, to start working on the economic, not just economic, but economic and social development and growth of the country, which again requires huge amount of resources. Given what the state of Syria is, many countries, unless they are actually just giving it as aid, many countries would be rather wary of entering into kind of any economic agreements, cooperation with Syria, unless the polity stabilizes. So very difficult. I expect that the USA, because particularly Shara has become the president, with the support of the USA, that USA will help Syria to prop up the current political regime.
Yes, we will be eyeing that. Thank you very much, Ambassador Suresh Goyal, for sharing that insight. Please stay with us as we come back to you for our next discussion as well. Now we stay in the region. Israeli National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir has confronted by stone-throwing protesters during a visit to the Bedouin village of Tarabin al-Sana today, following a series of police raids over the weekend. The raids led to the arrest of 3 residents suspected of attacking cars in nearby Jewish areas, allegedly in retaliation for an earlier raid on the village. Ben-Gvir has arrived under heavy security and was met with protests as police deployed tear gas to control the crowd. Several individuals were arrested, though the exact number remains unclear. Ben-Gvir has vowed to continue visiting the town despite the unrest, referring to the incident as a price tag attack, a term used for acts of violence in retaliation for perceived provocations. The police raids in the Negev have intensified in recent weeks, part of an operation called New Order, aimed at curbing violent crime, arms smuggling, and traffic violations in Bedouin towns. Many residents have criticized the military-style tactics and checkpoints, claiming that they infringe upon their rights as citizens. Now for this discussion, we welcome back former Ambassador Suresh Goyal. He's a former Indian diplomat, joins us live from New Delhi. Thank you very much, Ambassador, for staying with us. Now, looking at this and, many news coming out from Israel like this, what is Israel's responsibility as an occupying force towards the Palestinian people and the Bedouins over there?
You see, I would put it this way, that confrontation between the Bedouins and the Palestinians living in the West Bank in different areas and the Israeli security forces or the Israeli settlers are a common feature. They take place practically every day. They don't get reported on, but there is a constant confrontation between settlers, particularly, and the Palestinians and the Bedouins, most of whom are obviously Palestinians, but they also belong to the Muslim faith. Now, those confrontations take place mostly because settlers want to evict the Palestinians out of the territory. They want to, their own belief is that both Gaza and West Bank rightfully belongs to Israel, while before 1948, there were Palestinian territories before Israel was formed, and therefore this conflict arising. Uh, the two-state solution thought of earlier during Clinton's time had sought to basically overcome the problem, but this two-state solution is not acceptable to the rightist Israeli wings, and the security minister belongs to the rightist, the extreme rightist faction of the Israeli politics, and therefore his visits to that area evoke particular suspicion and distrust. When he visits the areas of these Bedouins on the ground of trying to find out the facts as to what happened in terms of attacks on the car, etc., instead of resolving the issues, it basically aggravates the local suspicions. I suspect that what happened again, the protest and everything, is that originates out of this deep suspicion, the political views of the national security minister, who is known to be the extreme rightist in his approach, and therefore the feelings among the Bedouins that these kind of visits would lead to further extreme security action against them. This all contributes to the further protest and problems.
Right. And yes, like you've mentioned, rightfully mentioned that settler violence being something very common over there, and also now Bedouins protecting their land by voicing or protecting their land by throwing stones at these visits by the ministers in the government. So in Israel, are these supported? As you know, Ben-Gvir is a extremist minister. Is he popular over there?
Popular amongst whom? Popular amongst settlers, yes. Popular amongst Bedouins, no. In terms of the role in the government, I think Prime Minister Netanyahu depends upon the rightist wing for support to continue in power, and therefore, in a sense, the rightist faction, they call the shots. So popularity is not important here. What is important here is how much policy action in their favor can be forced by them on the government. And I think Ben-Gvir has sufficient power and sufficient influence to be able to do that.
Yes, thank you for highlighting that. Thank you for highlighting that, Ambassador Suresh Goyal, and joining us today and sharing that insight throughout our news. Thank you very much. Now we move on to our next news. Heavy winter rains have flooded tents and makeshift shelters used by displaced Palestinians in Gaza City, leaving families struggling to stay dry as strong winds and downpours sweep the area. Residents say water entered their tents overnight, forcing them to stay awake in the fear of flooding. The United Nations says the severe weather has worsened conditions for hundreds of thousands of displaced people across Gaza. Aid agencies warn that children living in wet clothing and poorly insulated shelters face a growing risk of hypothermia as nighttime temperatures fall. Gaza's health authorities say one infant has passed away from hypothermia, while others were killed when weakened buildings collapsed. During the storms, dozens of emergency shelters were also flooded, forcing families to relocate once again. The UN says more tents, blankets, and winter clothing have entered Gaza since the ceasefire, but warns the scale of need remains far greater as harsh winter conditions continue. Let's listen in.
أنا عايشة بخيمة أنا وأطفالي. أقول لك الوضع عندنا كئيب جدا، الوضع مرعب. يعني الأطفال لما يصحوا في نص الليل نضلنا كل واحد يمسك سطل ولا جردل ونضلنا نكب المي من قلب الخيمة، نصحى كلنا غرقانين. إحنا شعب أعزل ما لناش ذنب بأي حاجة. إحنا عندنا أطفال، أنا كست كبيرة أنا بقدرش على عيشة الخيام قتلت في المطر، بنموت من السقعة والبرد في الشتاء، في الصيف بنموت من الحر. أنا بطالب منكم يعني حاجة بسيطة، جيبوا لنا كرفانات، مش نكونوش ابنوا لنا حاليا، وبين بس وفروا لنا كرفانات إلنا ولأطفالنا.
Now we move on to our next news. Authorities in Belgrade safely have removed a 470-kilogram World War II bomb from a construction site in the city center. The US-made an M44 bomb was used during Allied air raids on German positions in 1944. The site, located near residential areas and a shopping mall, underwent careful safety checks before the removal. Residents were asked to leave homes and move vehicles as a precaution. The bomb was transported 180 kilometers away to a military training ground where it will be destroyed in the coming days. Authorities said several unexploded bombs from past wars have been safely cleared in recent years across Serbia. That's all we have time for. Keep watching NewsX World for more news updates from around the world.